Alright, what's going on everyone? In this video we're going to be building a meditation app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, as you can see here on the screen, this is the application that we're going to be building here today. Now, before we get started with that, I first want to briefly run you through how this application is going to work. Now, at the very top here, we have the option to select the amount of breaths that we want to complete in our session. Now, by default, that value is going to be 3, but if we select this drop-down menu here, we have the option to change that from 3 to 5 or 7, okay? Now, just below this, we have this outline of a circle, and then we have this purple circle inside of it. Now, what this is going to do, as we take in a breath inside of our application here, the circle is going to enlarge to take up the entire space of this outline here. Then we're going to hold that shape. It's going to stay that size as we hold our breath. And then as we exhale the breath slowly, the circle will go ahead and return down to this initial size right here. Now we also have the breaths remaining here to inform our user how many breaths they have left in the session. Now if I change this up here in our select option here, the initial value will go ahead and change down here as well to 5, and then we have 7 as well. Okay, but I'm going to keep that to 3. What we're also going to do is give our user some instructions right here. So this text will change throughout the session inside of the application. So let me go ahead and demonstrate how this is actually going to work. So when I select begin, you're going to see the text down here is going to change. It's going to change once more, and then it's going to tell you to breathe in. And as we breathe in, the circle is going to enlarge. We're going to hold that breath. The shape is going to stay. And then as we exhale the breath, the circle is going to return down to the initial value. And then we're going to see that a breath remaining tick is deducted from this value right here. All right, so that's what we're going to be building. So let's go ahead and get started. So for this project, we're going to be using VS Code, and currently right now I have a folder called Meditation App with a background image inside of this folder currently. Now, if you want to get the completed files for this application, I'll leave a link down below in the description to the repository over on GitHub, and it will include this background image right here. Now, this image is going to be used on our application as the entire background that we're going to have behind our breathing application here. Okay, so let's begin by creating our necessary files here. So we need to have our index.html for our markup. Then we want to create our style sheet here. So we're going to say style.css. And then lastly, we need our JavaScript file. So I'm going to go ahead and call this app.js here. Okay, so currently we're going to start with our markup. So I'm just going to go ahead and close these two files here. And I'm going to be using a plugin called Emmet to go ahead and generate a boilerplate here. And that'll go ahead and generate the structure. And let's go ahead and give this a title. So we'll call this meditation app here in the title. And then let's go ahead and link up our style sheet and our app.js file here in our index. So, or our HTML file. So we import the style sheet inside of the head here. So we'll say, actually it's going to be link. And we'll say slash, and we'll get our style.css here. And now we link up our JavaScript file here inside of the body tag. So we'll do this inside of a script tag, and we'll say app.js here. Now, I'm also going to be using an additional plugin called Live Server to preview the changes as we go along here. So if I do that, it should go ahead and open up this browser here, which currently has nothing because we don't have any markup. Okay, so let's begin with our markup here. So the first thing I want to go ahead and create is going to be our input to determine the number of breaths that we want to have in our breathing session here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a div here with a class of input. Okay, now inside of here, I'm going to have a label, and we're going to get rid of the for. We don't need this. And we're going to have this say select breaths as the value or the actual text inside of our label here. Next up, we're going to create a select input here. So we'll say, let's see, select. And we can also get rid of the name and ID. We're not going to be using that here. Now inside of here, also I want to give this a class of breath input here. Okay, now inside of here, we want to have the ability to select a few options. Now the way we do that with a select is we pass these option tags here. And for the value, I'm going to go ahead and pass a 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and say inside of this tag 3 breaths like that. And then all I'm going to go ahead and do is copy this down 2 more times. And I'm going to change this out for 5. And we'll say 5. And then we're going to say 7 here. And we'll do 7 like that. Okay, and that's going to be it for our input here. Now, the next thing we want to go ahead and create is going to be our circle outline here. So as you can see, we want to create this, and we also want to create this circle in the middle here. So what we want to do is I'm going to have another div below our input, and I'm going to call this circle wrap. And inside of here, we're going to have two divs. We're going to have the first one have a class of circle outline, which is going to be for that outline you see. And then I'm going to copy this down, and we're going to have the other one be called circle progress, like that. And that will be for this middle circle right here. Okay, so the markup for this is actually pretty easy. Now below this, what I want to go ahead and do is start to output some paragraph tags here. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is create our first one, which is going to calculate the amount of breaths remaining in our session. So what I'm going to do is create a paragraph tag here. We're going to give it a class of breaths, and we're going to say breaths remaining. And I'm going to pass a span tag in here because we're going to want to dynamically output this number using JavaScript. So I'm going to go ahead and give a span tag in here, and we're going to pass it the class, let's see, of breaths, and we'll say text like that. And initially we're going to have it be set to 3 by default. So we're going to go ahead and give this a value of 3 here. Now the last thing, or we need two more things here, we're going to have our instructions paragraph text, which is going to have the instructions here for walking our user through the current session. Okay, so we'll do another paragraph tag here, and we can do a shorthand for class with Emmet by doing dot and then adding the class name you want. So this is going to be instructions here, and then I can hit enter, and it'll go ahead and generate that for us. And what we're going to have in here is we're going to say, are you ready to start breathing? Question mark. So that'll be initially what we want to show to our users here. Now the last thing we need here is going to be a button to go ahead and start our actual breathing session. So for this, we're going to go ahead and create a button tag here, and I'm going to pass it a class of start here. And what we want to do is pass it the value of begin here, and that's going to go ahead and do it for our markup. And if we head over to our browser here, this is what we're currently left with. Okay, so currently this is not looking all that great, so let's go ahead and address the styling here. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is we're going to be importing a Google font here. So I've already went ahead and pre-selected all of the font weights that I want, and we're going to be using the import directive here inside of our style sheet. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to head back over to our project here, and inside of our style sheet, I'm going to copy and paste this line in right here. Okay, and that's all we have to do. We can now use this font inside of our style sheet here and our project. So let's go ahead and start off by doing a reset here. So to do a reset, I'm using this asterisk, I think that's what it's called. And what we can do here is I'm going to reset the margin and the padding all to 0. So we'll start with padding, we'll say 0, we'll do margin 0, and I'm going to set a property of box sizing here, and we're going to use border box. Now the last thing I want to do is put the font family here, and we're going to say Poppins, and as a fallback we're going to do sans serif here. Okay, now let's start off with our body tag here. So I want to put a min height on here to 100 VH. We're going to display this as flex. We want it to be a flex direction of a column. And I want to justify and align all of the content to the center. So since we are displaying this as flex, I can do justify content center and then align items to the center. Now for everything here, I want the color to be white. Okay. Now we have this background image here that I want to set on our entire application here. So we're going to do that on the body. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass the background property here. We're going to say URL. And we want to go ahead and get that background image. So I'm going to do slash, and we're going to do bg.jpg here. And there's one other property I'm going to use, and it's called background size, and we're going to set it to cover here. So with this set, if I head back over to our app here, you should see now if I refresh it, we're going to have this background right now, and then we have all of our content here right in the center, and it is all white. Okay, so that all looks great. Now, what I want to do is, because this image is quite bright, you can see here on the finished version, we have this black background over the top of it. Now, how we're going to do that is we're going to be using the after selector here. So I'm going to go ahead and target the body, 2 colons, and we're going to say after. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the content property, and we'll say content, and we'll set that equal to an empty string. Now, by default, the body is positioned as relative. So what I want to do is I want to position this absolute to that, okay? And we're going to give this a height of 100% and a width of 100%, so it covers the entire space of the body, okay? And for the background color here, what I'm going to do is we're going to say, let's go background. Why isn't it showing? There it is. We're going to do RGBA. And what I want to pass here is the color of black. So we're going to say 0 for R, 0 for G, 0 for B, and then for the alpha, we're going to give it a 60% opacity here. Okay, and that should go ahead and just do 0.6. Why is that not saving? Do we do something wrong? Let me see. I think that should be good. RGBA, background color. Yeah, that should be good. Okay, and then lastly, I want to go ahead and pass a z-index here of -1. Well, actually, let me show you what it looks like currently without that. Okay, it looks like I have a prettier option error here. What do we do wrong? Let me see. So not exactly sure what happened there, but I had to restart VS Code, and that seemed to go ahead and fix the error with prettier. That was actually formatting this document. But anyways, like I was saying, let me show you what this looks like currently before we add any z-index values. So on our meditation app here, you can see we have this black background, but now it's overlaying our white text. So what we can do to avoid this and have this be pushed to the back is we can give it a z-index here, and we can say -1, and what's going to happen here, if we look at it now, it's going to push it to the back, and then all of our text will be on top of it. Okay, so that looks a lot better. Now, the next thing we want to go ahead and do here is actually start styling some of our content here. So first off, what we want to do is we want to style our input here. So right below our body, I'm going to target our class of input here, and I want to display this as flex, and we're going to do a flex direction of column here. And then I want to add some separation from our input to our circle wrap by 40 pixels. So we're going to have a margin on the, let's see, bottom here, and we're going to say 40 pixels right there. Now, the next thing I want to go ahead and target is our label. Now, we don't have more than one label in here, so I could go ahead and just say label, but if you want to target the label specifically inside of our input, all you need to do is say .input and say label, which I'm going to go ahead and do for this project just to explicitly show you how to target that one specific label. So what we want to do in here is we want to have it text align to the center. We're going to give this a little bit larger font size, so by default it's 16. I want it to be 18. And I want to give it some separation from our select box by 8 pixels. So once again, we're going to say margin on the bottom, and we'll do 8 pixels. And that's going to be it for our label. Now the last thing we need to go ahead and style up is going to be our actual input. So we're going to say input here again, and we'll say select. And what we want to do in here is by default it has a border. We're going to set that to none. We want to round the corners here on the actual select itself. So we're going to say border radius. I'm going to pass the value of 8 pixels here. I'm going to give this a min width of 300 pixels here. And I want the font size to be 16 pixels because by default I believe it's a little bit smaller. Now I'm going to give it some padding here, so we're going to do 8 pixels on the top and bottom and 4 pixels on the left and right here. And I'm going to pass this a background color here, and we're going to be using the color of, let's see, 6236FF. And then I want to give it a color here of white. Now, by default, when you hover over a input here, so you can see that looks a lot better. When I do that, you should see that it's going to have this outline here. So I don't like that. It looks really bad in my opinion. So to get rid of that, what we can do is we can say input, and we'll target the select, and we're going to get the focus state here. And we can go ahead and pass outline here and set that to none, and that'll go ahead and remove that really nasty outline you get when you click on the actual select itself. Okay, so the next thing we want to go ahead and do here is currently we don't have our circle. So that is all going to be generated with CSS here. That's why you're not seeing anything at the moment. Okay, so the first class that I want to go ahead and target is going to be our circle wrap here. And we're going to display this as flex. We're going to do a flex direction of column. We're going to justify the content here to the center. And we're going to align the items to the center as well. And you'll see why we're doing this in just a moment. And then we also want to pass this a position relative here. And we're going to give it a margin bottom to separate it from our additional content, such as the breast remaining here and our instructions by 40 pixels. So we'll say margin on the bottom of 40 pixels here. Now next here, we want to target our circle outline. So we'll say circle outline here. And what we want to do is we want to give this a width of 300 pixels and we want to give it a height of 300 pixels here. And we want to make this into a circle. So how we can do that is by passing it the property of border radius, and we can give it a value of 50%. Okay. Now we don't want this circle to be filled. We want it to just be a border of a circle. So what I'm going to do is we're going to say background here, color, and we're going to set this to transparent. And then we're going to pass it the border property here, which we're going to create a border that's going to have a 15 pixel, or that's going to be 15 pixels big. And we're going to pass the solid here. And the color is going to be F1, F1, F1. Okay. And then lastly, what I want to do is pass it a box shadow here, which I'm just going to copy and paste in. If you want to just pause it and copy this in, you're more than welcome to do that. I'll just scroll over here really quick as well. Okay. And that's going to be it for our circle outline. So if I save this and we head over to our app here, you should see now we have this nice circle here. Okay, so next up we want to work on the circle inside of this circle. Okay, so let's go ahead and target circle and we'll do progress. Now for this, what we want to do is we're going to pass this a width of 50 pixels and we're going to pass it a height of 50 pixels. Okay, now if you recall, we have the circle wrap set to position relative. So I want to set the circle progress absolute to that. So what we'll do is we'll say position and we'll do absolute. Now, since we set this to display flex and justify and align all the items to the center, if we actually pass this to background color here, first off, background color, and we're going to use the same color we already did, 6236FF. If we head over here now, we should see that the circle is going to be, well, it's not a circle yet, but it's going to be directly inside of the middle of this outline here, which is what we want. Okay, so we're pretty much achieving that by setting this position absolute, and then it's setting it to the center because our container here is aligning all the items to the center. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So what we want to do is we want to make this a circle. So we're going to say border radius and put that to 50% here. Okay. Now what we also want to do is we want to pass this a transition, and you'll see why a little bit later, but we're going to say 4 seconds ease and set it to all. And I'm going to use the same exact box shadow here. And I believe that's all we had to do. Okay. So if we look at this now, you should see it's going to be a circle, and that looks really good. Now, you may be wondering, how are we going to transform or make the circle become bigger as the user is breathing through the application? So what we're going to do is we're going to create another class here called circle. Let's see here, CIR, circle grow. And we're going to pass it the property of transform here, and we're going to say scale. Now what I want to do, I'm going to pass it the value of 5.3 here. So currently you're not going to see anything happen because we don't have this class set, but what we're going to be doing is adding this class and removing it with JavaScript. But let me show you what happens here if I go ahead and add this class to our actual circle wrap here and circle progress. So if I paste this in, save it, what you'll see happen is it should go ahead and fill up the entire circle here. But what's going to happen is when we dynamically add that, we have this transition set on our style here to be 4 seconds. It's going to go from what it's at to this value right here over 4 seconds. Okay, and you'll see more of that a little bit later. Now moving along here, let's go ahead and actually remove that so it doesn't cause issues when we start hooking up our JavaScript. Okay, and I believe if I remove that, it should shrink down slowly, but maybe it won't. Okay, so it went back there initially, so that's all good. So let's work on a few of our remaining classes here. So we have the class of breaths here, and what I want to do is we're going to say text align this to the center. We're going to give this a margin on the bottom of 24 pixels. And then we want to give this a font size of a little bit larger to make it stand out, and we're going to say 24. Okay, and then we have our instructions. And let me scroll down here a little bit to put that into the middle of the screen. And what we want to do here is just say text align, center, and then margin bottom 32 pixels. Okay, and that's going to be it. Now the last remaining classes here are going to be for our buttons. So what I want to do is I'm just going to target the button by the button tag here, and we're going to give it a padding. We're going to say 8 pixels on the top and bottom, 20 on the left and right. We're going to round the corners here with a border radius of 8 pixels, and then we're going to give it a background color here. Let's see, and we'll say our 6236FF, and we're going to make the text color white here, and we want to give it a border of none. We're going to do a cursor pointer here, and then a few other things we want is going to be a transition when we do a hover property, so we want it to happen smoothly. So we're going to say 0.3 seconds here, ease and all. And I believe what we want to also do is grab a box shadow here. So I'm going to copy and paste this in. So it's going to be a little bit different from the ones we have on our circle here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. And like I mentioned, if you want to pause the video and copy this in, you're more than welcome to, or you can just grab the styling from the finished repository. Okay, now if we take a look, it should look pretty good. Everything should start to be coming together now, but I want to go ahead and add a hover property to our button here. So when you hover over it, it has a cool, change of the background color. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say button, and we'll say hover. And all I want to do is change the background color here to become F1, F1, F1. And we're going to pass it the color of the current background color, which is 6236FF. Now, there's also one other class I want to go ahead and create here. It's going to be for the button inactive. So when we start our breathing session here, we don't want the user to be able to click button again. Like, we don't want them to click the button again during the breathing session to mess anything up. So we're going to add an active state to our application once the user clicks begin. So we need a class of that to go ahead and alter the appearance of it once they do. So we're going to say button, see if I can type, active here, and we're going to change it to pointer events and none. Okay, so we don't want them to be able to click on it, and we're going to say background color here, and we're going to set it equal to 969696, which is a lighter gray, and then we want to set the color to white here, which actually we shouldn't need because it's already set to white there. So we actually don't need that there. Okay, so that's going to be our button inactive class here. And that's going to go ahead and do it for our styling here. So we take a look, you should see nothing really changed, but now when we hover over this button here, it changes the background color and the text color. Now, if I can show you that inactive state here, so let's go back and let's just go ahead and add that to our button really quick. And we'll go back here, and on our button of the class start, which is add that inactive class, and you can see that it should change the background color to that gray, and we no longer have the ability to click on this. All right, so let's just go ahead and remove that. And yeah, that is going to be our styling here. So currently we have our application built out from a static point, meaning we can look at it, it looks great, but if we click on any options here or click begin, nothing happens. So the last thing we need to go ahead and do here is add some JavaScript in order to make this meditation app functional. Now there's a few different moving parts to making this functional that I want to break down into different segments here. Now the first portion is going to be when a user selects an option here in the number of breaths that they want to take here in their session. So let's go ahead and address that first. So inside of our project here, let's head over to our app.js. Now the first thing we need to go ahead and do here is create some references to certain classes and elements within our application here. So let's go ahead and start. So the first one I want to go ahead and create is going to be called circle progress here, which is going to refer to our circle that we have here inside of our markup with the class of circle progress. Okay, so how we can achieve this, or we can get a hold of this, is by saying document.query selector here, and we're going to go ahead and pass this the class name. So circle progress, and I spelled that wrong. Okay, and there's our first reference. Now we need a few more here. So the next one's going to be const number of breaths here, and this is going to be equal to the value that a user is going to select in that drop down menu. So we'll say document.query selector here, and we're going to say breath, can't spell today, input here. Okay. Then next up we have our start button. So we'll say const start, and we'll set that equal to document.query selector here, and we'll say start. Next up we have our instructions div, so our instructions paragraph. So we'll say instructions here, and same thing, pretty repetitive here. So we'll say query selector, and we'll say instructions. And then the last one we need to get a hold of is going to be the breath text, okay? Which is going to output the number of breaths that we have left. So we'll say const text here, and lastly document dot query selector, and we gave that a class. I forgot to put the period there. Breaths and text. Okay, so there are our 5 references. Now, the last variable that I want to create is going to be the actual breaths left. So what we're going to do here is create a new variable with let, because we're going to be changing this. So in order for us to change, we need to declare it with let here, so we can update the value throughout our JavaScript file here. So we're going to call this breaths, and we'll say left. And by default, if you recall, this value is going to equal 3. So we'll just go ahead and give it an initial value by default every time the application loads in of 3. Now, the first thing we want to go ahead and do, like I mentioned, is listen for a change here on this input, and then we need to update this down here. So if a user selects 5, we want this to update to 5. Okay, so there's a few things we need to do. So first off, let's go ahead and do a comment here so that we can separate all of our functions, and if we need to reference anything, it's going to be a little bit easier to do so. So this right here, this function we're going to create is going to be for watching for selected breaths from user. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to look at this variable right here of number of breaths, and what we're going to say is we're going to add a event listener here. Okay. Now the event we want to listen for is each time someone changes this input here, it's going to fire a event of change. So let's go ahead and listen for that. And then what we want to do here is we want to run a callback function each time that it changes. Now, what do we want to do whenever it changes? So first off, what we want to do is change this variable right here of breaths left to the value that the user has selected. Now, how we can do that, if you recall, inside of our input here, this is just going to be for display only. We're really not going to be referencing this right here. What we want is this value inside of, or the number here inside of this value. Okay, so that's what we're going to be referencing here in this function. So we're going to say breaths left is going to equal the number of breaths, and we can go ahead and get that value that was currently selected. And I spelled that wrong. Okay, so let's go ahead and update that. Now what we also want to do is on our breath text right here, we want to go ahead and make that value inside of that span tag this right here. So let's go ahead and say breath text, and we're going to say inner text here, and we're going to set this equal to the amount of breaths that we have left. Okay, so now if we head back over to this application, we should be able to see that whenever we change this value in here, that this value should update to the number that we selected right here. So just to ensure this is working properly, I'm going to go ahead and refresh it. So if I select 5, you should now see that this updates to 5. And if I go ahead and click 7, that is going to go update to 7. Now, the next thing we need to do here is control the growing and the shrinking of our circle here inside of this circle outline. All right, so let's go ahead and work on that. Now, let's do a few line breaks here, and we'll add a new comment, and we'll go ahead and say grow/shrink circle here. So what we want to do is create a new function here to grow and shrink our circle. So pretty simple, and we're going to do that by toggling this class we created earlier inside of our CSS of circle grow. Okay, so what we want to do is create a new arrow function here. So I'll call this function grow circle. Okay, and we'll set this equal to an arrow function here. Now inside of here, what we want to do is, first off, when this function is toggled, we want to apply that class of circle grow. So what we can do is we can reference our circle progress variable up here, which is at the top, and we're going to go ahead and say class list, and we want to add the class list of circle grow. So we'll say circle grow like that. Now, in this application, how it's going to work is you're going to breathe in for 4 seconds, you're going to hold it for 4 seconds, and then after that, we want to release our breath. Okay, so it's going to be the 4-4-4 method. Now, what we want to do is we want this circle grow to be removed after the user is done holding their breath. So if we're doing it by the 4-4-4 method, we'd want to trigger the removal of this class after 8 seconds. Now, how we can do that using JavaScript is with a set timeout. So we can go ahead and say right here, set timeout, and we're going to run our arrow function here. And inside of here, what we want to do is I'm just going to copy this snippet of code right here, and we're going to change it from add to remove. Now, the second you pass another value here after the arrow function, and you go ahead and specify the time you want or the time you want to have in order to delay this function from running. So in our case, it's going to be 8 seconds. So we'll pass it the value of 8,000 here. Okay, so nothing's going to happen here because we are not actually calling this function. So what I want to do is we have this variable right here of start, which is going to be our button. So what I want to do is, because we're going to have to do this anyways, let's go ahead and set up an event listener that when we click on start, let's go ahead and run this function here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a few line breaks, and we'll just have a new comment here, and we'll call this start breathing. Can't type. Okay, so we're going to do it very similar to how we did our number of breaths right here. We're going to say start.add event listener, and we're going to pass at this time, we're going to say click. We don't want to listen for a change. We want to listen for a click here. Let me scroll down a little bit. And then we're going to have our function here. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to call the grow circle function here. So now when I click on the start button on our application, we should see our circle grow. And then after 8 seconds, it's going to remove that class, and then it's going to shrink down back to its initial size. Now, I want you to recall that I did mention earlier that we have this transition here of 4 seconds ease all. Now, why that's important is because it's going to take 4 seconds for this to get to the maximum size, because we have it set right here to 4 seconds, and then it's going to hold for 4 seconds, and then we want it to release over 4 seconds. So hopefully it's not too confusing and you understand why we're using this value right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and see this in action here. So if I click on begin, you should see now the circle is going to grow, and we should see after 8 seconds here, or 8 seconds total from clicking begin, we should see the circle go back to its initial size here. So when we click begin here on our application, what we also want to do is update the instructions down here so that the user knows exactly what they're going to be doing during their breathing session, whether it be breathing in, holding it, or exhaling the breath. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin to implement that. Now, just below our grow circle function here, I'm going to do a few new line breaks, and we'll have a new comment, and this will be called breathing instructions. Okay, and we're going to create a new function here, and I'll call this breathe text update, and we'll set this equal to an arrow function here. Now, the first thing you want to do is each time this function runs, we want to decrease the value of breaths left by 1. So we're going to take this value right here and we're going to decrease it. So we'll say breaths left minus minus, and we'll do a semicolon. That will go ahead and decrease it by 1. Okay, now with that value, we want to go ahead and update our value right here of the remaining breaths, and we want to set it equal to this new value here, which is going to be 1 less. So what we'll do is we can just copy this line of code right here where we're updating the text, and we'll say breaths text.inner text is going to equal this new value. Okay, now on top of this, we want to start to update our actual instructions here, which is going to be this div right here. Okay, so as you recall, we're going to be doing the 4-4-4 method. So first off, what we want to do is when this function is called, we're going to say instructions dot inner text is going to equal breathe in. Okay, now after 4 seconds here, we want to go ahead and update that again, and we want them to hold the breath. So very similar to how we did a set timeout here, we're gonna do that again. So we're gonna say set timeout, and we'll do our function here. And then we'll say after 4 seconds, which will be equal to 4,000 here. Now after 4 seconds, what we want to do is you want to take the instructions once again, and we're going to say enter text here, and we're going to set this equal to hold, oops, that's outside of the, we'll say hold breath. Okay. Now, since we also want to do an additional timeout, because after 4 more seconds, we want to tell them to exhale the breath slowly. So we can actually nest another set timeout inside of this set timeout right here. So what we'll do is we'll say set timeout again, do our function here. We'll say 4,000 again for 4 more seconds. And then we want to say instructions dot enter text is going to equal, let's see, exhale breath slowly. Okay, so now if we take this function and we call it when we hit start, we should see now the text should align with our circle growing, holding, and shrinking. And we should also see it be decreased by 1 on our breaths remaining here. So let's copy this, put that there. We'll save this, and if we head back over to our application here, if I refresh it and we click begin, you should see it's going to say breathe in, which it's supposed to, and then it's going to say hold breath for 4 seconds, and then as the circle goes back to its normal size, it's going to say to exhale the breath slowly, and we can see that this was also decreased by 1. So currently when we start our breathing application here, it's only going to run through 1 time, which that's not exactly what we want to have happen. What we want is for these 2 functions right here to execute as many times as we have inside of this variable right here, as long as it's not equal to 0. Okay, so if it's 3, you want it to execute 3 times. Now, how we're going to achieve this is with a set interval method, which is going to execute code over and over again after a certain amount of time that you specify. So it works very similar to the set timeout method here, except set timeout runs the code inside of it once after a certain amount of time. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So let's go ahead and generate this right below our breathing instructions function here. So I'll do a new comment and we'll say breathing app function here. And we'll just capitalize that to make everything consistent here. So let's go ahead and create a new function. So we're going to call this const breathing app. And let's see here. We'll set this equal to a new arrow function here. And what we want to do is create another variable here for our set interval. Now, normally you wouldn't need to set the set interval to a variable, but since we want to clear this after a certain amount of time, we have to set it equal to a variable so that we can call the clear interval method on that set interval itself. So I'll call this const and we'll say, let's see, be breathing animation here, because this is pretty much going to animate our entire application. I'm sure there's a better name for this, but that's just what I chose here. So we're going to set this equal to set interval here, which is going to accept a function here. And what we want to do is we want to run this every 12 seconds because we're going to be doing the 4-4-4. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then exhale. So we're going to pass the interval here of every 12 seconds. We want this code to run here. Okay. Now, what we want to do is you want to ensure that this variable or this value of breaths left does not equal 0. Now, if it does equal 0, that means we are done with our session. So we want to clear this interval here. So let's do a little if check here. So we'll say if, and we're going to say breaths left is equal to 0. Then what we want to do is run the clear interval, and we want to pass this value of breathing animation right here inside of here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say that. Now, if it doesn't equal 0, so what we can do is just return out of here. So we'll say return. Now, if it doesn't equal 0, then we want to simply go ahead and just call these 2 functions right here. All right, so let's go ahead and click on this and we'll paste that in there. Now, what we want to do is we want to come down to our start here, and we also want to call this breathing app function here. Now, you may be wondering, why would I still need to call these two functions here? Now, the reason why we still need to call these here when we start is because this is not going to run for 12 seconds off the initial starting of our application. So we still want to invoke these manually here. And then after the first iteration of breathing is done, then this interval will pick up and it'll run it again the second time, and then it'll run it a third time. And then when it goes to run it the fourth time, it'll see that, for example, if our value is 3, that this is equal to 0. And then it will go ahead and clear the interval and the application will be done. We'll be done with our session here. So let's go ahead and check this out and make sure everything is working. So right now, if I click on this, or if I go back to our application here, if it's set to 3, we should see that it should run 3 times, and after that it should, stop. So let's go ahead and check it and make sure that it works here. So breathe in. Exhale. So there's our first breath. So we should see this happen 2 more times, and after that we should see that it stops, and then our breathing session will be over. Now, our breathing app works great and it functions as it's supposed to, but there's still a few things I want to go ahead and tweak. So first off, when we select begin here, I want to disable this button so you can't click on it during a breathing session. Now, if I refresh this once more, you'll see when I click begin, breathing happens very abruptly and a user may not be ready for that. So we want to give them some time to, get ready. And if we head over to our finished demo here, we can see that when I click begin on this one, the button is disabled, and we have these instructions here for about 4 seconds that appears before breathing starts to kind of let the user have a couple seconds to get themselves ready. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin to implement that here. So let me refresh it to stop that. Now, inside of this add event listener here on our start button, what I want to do is first off, let's go ahead and add that class we created earlier on of button inactive to our starting button. So let's go ahead and say start.add, or sorry, it's going to be class list dot add, got ahead of myself there, and we're going to say button inactive. Okay, so now when we start our breathing application, this button will become inactive and we won't be able to click on it. Now, like I said, we are going to add some instructions prior to starting our application here. So what we want to do is we're going to first off say instructions here, and we want to change it from are you ready to start breathing to what are we going to say? We're going to say get relaxed and ready to begin breathing here. So let's go ahead and update that. So inside of here, we're going to say instructions dot inner text is going to equal, and let me just put some quotes around that, get relaxed and ready to begin breathing. Now, what we want to do is we need to use a set timeout here because we want to give them some time in between this and actually starting our session, because right now, if we don't have any of this, it's going to just start right away and you're really not going to see this text right here. So let's go ahead and call a set timeout method here. And we'll do our arrow function here. And we're going to call this after 2 seconds, so we'll pass it 2000. Now, we also want to add an additional text change here to the instructions, and we're going to say breathing is about to begin. So we want to give the user about 4 seconds here of time to, let them know that they're going to be starting their session here. So let me just go ahead and copy this text in as well. And it's going to say breathing is about to begin. Now, then after this, we want to give them 2 more seconds, and then we want to invoke our functions here. So we're going to nest another set timeout here, and we'll say set timeout, our arrow function here, and we're going to say another 2000 value for 2 seconds. And then what we want to do is copy and cut these out. And inside of this set timeout, we're going to go ahead and call this. Now, what's going to happen here is, hopefully this makes sense, is when we start our application or our breathing session, it's going to prompt the instructions here for 2 seconds. And then after 2 seconds, it's going to change to this. And then after 2 more seconds, our breathing is going to begin. Okay, so let's go ahead and see this in action here. So if I refresh it to make sure all the changes are updated here, if I click begin, you should see it says get relaxed, breathing is about to begin, and then breathing will happen. Now, I don't want to run through all of this, but once the application finishes here, we need to reset it because it just doesn't look good to leave it on this instruction here of exhale, breath slowly, and have the breaths remaining to 0. So I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this because I don't want to keep it running. So what we need to do, and we also need to remove the inactive class here on the button when we finish. So inside of our breathing app function here, if breaths left equals 0, then we want to do a little reset on our application here. So first off, what we want to do is I'm just going to copy and paste it in because it is quite lengthy of a text. So first off, we want to clear the interval here. Then I'm going to copy and paste this in right here, which is just going to change the instructions text to say breathing session completed, click begin to start another session. Okay. Now on top of this, what we want to do is let's just go here. We're going to say start.classList here. And we want to remove that button inactive class, okay? So that the user can initiate another session if they would like. So we'll say inactive here, okay? Now, what we also want to do is we want to get the number of breaths that they initially went ahead and did. So what we'll do here is we'll say breaths left is going to equal, so we'll come back up here to show you where I'm getting this from, the number of breaths, which we're going to get the value from. So what this is going to say is we want to set or reset the breaths left variable here to the initial value that they went ahead and selected when they started the session. So let me just go ahead and say number of breaths, and we're going to say value. And then lastly, we will want to update that so they can see that inside of this right here, okay? So let's go ahead and say breaths text dot inner text is going to equal breaths loops. Let's see, left here. Okay. Now with this will go ahead and wrap up our application. But if we go and look at this now, we should be able to get through an entire breathing session. And then once we get through the last breath, our application should reset. The instructions should say session has completed. The button should be re-inactive, so it should be active. And everything will be reset back to its initial value here. So let's go ahead and test this out. Let's refresh here and let's run through another session here. So it appears that the remaining breaths are undefined. So let me see why that is. And oh, you know what? It looks like I spelled value wrong here. So if that was spelled right, that would have worked. Now, everything else worked as it should. So once the session completed, we have this text right here letting them know that it was completed, and they can click begin to start another session. And then our button became active again. So if I was to go ahead and change value, that will go ahead and fix that small issue here, and then our function would be completely reset here. So that's going to go and wrap up our meditation app here for today. If you want to see more projects and videos like this, make sure to leave a comment down below and thumbs up this video. And if you guys are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Take care.